Okay, we're going. All right, so in your Bibles, turn to Luke chapter 9. However, I'm going to have you turn to Luke chapter 9, and then you're just going to kind of hold it there. We're going to cover a lot of stuff today. Basically, this is what I want to encourage you to do in the next few weeks. This is the goal of what we're looking. What I really would like you to do is to get down and really be reading the Bible. Okay, reading the Bible yourself and getting just having that as a habit. Now, there's a couple things that I'm going to say just as they. Now, when I first became a Christian, and the Bible is this enormous book and very complicated. It's really hard to kind of get a grasp of what's going on in the Bible. So the first Bible that I read, I mean, I tried reading the Bible. I felt like I was making really great progress. And I mean, because I had read a lot. I read a lot of stuff. And I'm like going, and I'm like, man, I read so much. I'm looking at the Bible. I'm still at the beginning. I've only gotten to the middle of Exodus. Oh my goodness. Oh man, I can't believe it. Anyway, the Bible's really big, really complicated, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So what I did, what's that? Go ahead, speak up.
They always tell people to read John first, and I don't think that's a good idea.
Yeah. No, I mean, don't. Well, I mean, you can start in the middle if you want, but it's definitely the middle.
Right.
And when you're reading John, you are losing a bunch because, like, you weren't here last week, but like last week we talked about how there was one chapter in John which you have to kind of have the information of like 3 or 4 other chapters earlier in the Bible to kind of get an idea of what's going on in this chapter. And so it's hard to start in the middle. And this is why I want to do a couple things. First of all, so when I was reading it, the very first Bible that I actually read all the way through was called the Picture Bible, which is basically a comic book Bible. And so just reading through the comic book Bible and going it through. Now, the nice thing about this particular one is that unlike most children's Bibles, you see a lot of children's Bibles out there, and most children's Bibles are just highlights.
Right.
You know, they're only kind of hitting some of the high points, but very few of them are actually telling you the story of the Bible. But this comic books Bible called the Picture Bible actually goes through and tells you the story of the Bible from the beginning to the end. And it actually, while it doesn't cover all the details, especially because it's a comic book Bible, and it really is written kind of for older kids. And there's a lot of stories in the Bible that
you really wouldn't be drawing pictures of.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to draw pictures of. It's really difficult. There are some stories in the Bible. I mean, the Bible is R-rated. You read through the Bible and it's R-rated. It's extraordinarily violent and has a fairly amount of non-graphic sex. A lot of it, but it's not graphic. You're wondering whether you call it R-rated.
I'm wondering if the violence might
be stronger than R. Well, but I think they leave a lot to the imagination, and so like it's like an R movie that where there's this horrendous torture scene, and then it skips away just before the really nasty part. You know what happened, but you didn't see it.
Yeah.
That's the way the Bible is a lot of times, you know, where it's kind of telling you. Sometimes it's kind of skirting around, but it doesn't actually tell you extraordinarily graphically what's happening. But it happened, and you know it happened.
Right.
And so it's a lot like that. So I call the Bible R-rated. But I still think if we're going to talk about the Bible, we need to have a basic idea of doing that. If you're going to do that, rather than doing a regular translation, I would recommend one of two things. Either one, the New Living Translation. The New Living Translation is a translation. It is word for word, but it has It's the only translation that I've seen that actually is written in normal, everyday English.
Okay.
It tells you the whole story, but it's everyday English. It isn't just this kind of hard to read Bibleese that we usually get with Bible
So it'd be
translations.
the New Living Bible.
New Living Translation,
Oh.
not Bible, because Living Bible is a different one.
Mm.
And so, New Living Translation. The second thing I would recommend, as far as this goes, is a book. It's a book that's written by one person, and it's called The Book of God. Okay, it's called The Book of God. It is not a translation. It is a person, a novelist, who is trying to write the Bible as if it were a novel. But he tries to keep to the story. And it's written by a guy named Walter Wangerin.
I see.
And so it's big because it's trying to cover the whole story. So that's three of them that you could do to get the big picture of the Bible, to get to try to just read the story of the Bible. So one is the picture Bible, which I still think is really successful. If you happen to like comic book, that type of style of reading, which I did when I was a kid, then that's a good one to go. Or go if you want to go do a translation, then you just want to read it. I highly recommend the New Living Translation, which you can get for really cheap. You can get it for like $6. And then the other one is the Book of God, which is basically somebody writing down, and he's writing down the story of the Bible as if it were a novel. So it's like reading a novel, except it's the Bible story, and it's pretty accurate. So those three I would definitely recommend. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, in the next few weeks, I'm going to give you a very quick version of the big picture of the Bible.
Okay.
So if you're going to read the Bible and you're going to say, wait, where are we? If you remember the story that I'm telling you over the next few weeks, then you'll have a basic idea of where you're at in the story. Okay, generally if you're going to pick up anywhere. And so this is, so I'm going to tell you kind of how I read the Bible and the big picture that I see. Now, some of this is going to be definitely my own interpretation of things.
Okay.
Okay. And I will try to tell you and just say, okay, this is really me, but this is how I see it. So for instance, the way that I see the Bible, this is how I see the story of the Bible going. This is what I think is the main theme of the Bible, is that God created the world, and he's overlooking all of the world, and he is trying to figure out how to create justice and peace in the world. And he is trying a lot of different things, and he's working with a lot of different people and trying out different things to see what is actually going to bring the world closer to real justice and real peace. And so he's tried out a lot of different things, and we see in the Bible a lot of the things that he's tried, and how the final solution, the ultimate solution, was Jesus. And the things that he did. That's how I see the story of the Bible going. Other people will tell you other things and say, well, no, that's not what the Bible's about. The Bible's about something else. That's just how I read it. So the thing is that, so like right at the very beginning, Genesis chapter 1. Remember, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, that all of the world was covered with darkness and with water. And these were powers that were trying to take over the world. And God separated them, said, no darkness. Now you stay over here. You stay in this part. You're only allowed to have half the day, and light's going to have the other half. And now you water. You only get part of the earth. You don't get the whole thing. Land gets a whole bunch of it too. So stop being so greedy. Okay, and then God set up humanity to be in charge of all the earth, which some people consider to be a particularly bad idea. And God went ahead and he said, okay, humanity, you guys are in charge. So, but I'm going to be there to counsel you. I'm going to be there to mentor you. You listen to what I say. Make sure that you listen to what I say and do the things that I say. Otherwise, things are going to turn out really badly. In which one of the things that they did pretty quickly was they said, God, we don't want you telling us what to do. We're in charge. We don't want you telling us what to do. We will decide what's right, and we will decide what's wrong. We don't want you telling us what's right or wrong. And then the first thing they did was make up a bunch of things that were right and wrong. Like you'd say, oh, nudity, that's a bad thing. We're going to get rid of that. That's just a shameful thing. And God's like, who told you it was shameful? It's like, well, we made it up. That's the reason. And so God went ahead and he said, okay, you're on your own. But then God has to work kind of behind the scenes. He still wants humanity to learn how to love. He still wants humanity to create a world that is just and to create a world that is peaceful. And so he does, and so he's trying to still work behind the scenes. So very first thing that happens after God kicks humanity out of the garden is the first murder happens. Oh, great. Now they're killing each other. And then pretty soon the entire world is killing each other. They're like, oh, this person looked at me funny. I'm going to kill him. I mean, really? It says so in the Bible. It's a crazy thing. And so pretty much everybody is just killing each other for no particular reason. And God said, oh my goodness, this whole thing is a mess. This is the absolute opposite of what I was looking for. I was looking for something peaceful and just, and these people are out there doing the very worst thing. He says, forget it. I'm going to scrap the whole thing and start again. However, God remembered his promise. He made a promise. And the promise was that humanity was going to be in charge of the world. And if he kills all of humanity, then that promise won't be kept. So instead, he saved a family out. And we know who the family is, right?
Yeah.
That's Noah. Noah and his family. So 8 people. And they went on the ark, and they crossed the flood, and they crossed the flood, and then everyone else is wiped out except for Noah. The reason that Noah was set aside is because he was trying to not kill people. He was trying to avoid that kind of violence and that kind of injustice. And so he and his family went, and the entire world was wiped clean. And then Noah and his animals and his people filled up the world. And then the first thing that Noah did as soon as he was done is he planted a vineyard and he got drunk. But that's a different story. Anyway, so it's a true story though. True story. Okay, so now the thing is that, okay, so now you've got Noah's people. So God says, well, maybe if Noah has his kids, then maybe the world won't be so violent. And we look around and we think, well, God, I'm not sure that really worked. Okay, it's not as violent.
Right.
It isn't as violent as it used to be. So it's better, kind of. Still lots of people being killed.
Yeah.
Still not, we wouldn't call this world non-violent in any way. We wouldn't call this world just in any way. And that's what God saw too. So God went and he looked around and he says, well, you know what? What I need somebody who I can mentor, like I did with Adam right at the beginning. I need someone who's going to listen to me, right?
Right.
So out of all the world, God chose this one guy, Abraham. And he chose Abraham because, well, basically God said, hey, Abraham, how about if you just leave your father and leave everything you know and start going somewhere, and I'll tell you when you get there. That's what he told Abraham. And Abraham goes, okay, God, sounds good. And he packs up his family and goes. And God said, this is my kind of guy. I like this guy. He's very cool. The other thing that Abraham had is he was extraordinarily generous. If there was anyone who was in trouble, if anybody was in need, he was there. He was there to help, you know. And so this is And God's like, wow, this is exactly the kind of guy that I want the whole world to be like. I want the whole world to be people who are just like, oh, do this loving thing, and they'll just do it. I want the whole world to be, oh, look, this person's in need, and they'll just do it. I want everybody to be like this. And so he says, Abraham, I'll tell you what, I'm going to have your family, you're going to be a huge nation, and you're going to bless all the world. Now, God's thinking the whole world, meaning Abraham is going to teach everyone to be hospitable, to be kind, to be merciful. Okay, and that was fine, kind of. But let's just say that Abraham's grandkids weren't necessarily quite so kind and generous and thoughtful. His grandson Esau was a violent guy, kind of. I mean, he was very loving to his father and to his family, but he was kind of violent otherwise. He was, and his other grandson was Jacob, and well, when he was born, he was basically called a cheat. The name Jacob means heel grabber, which means this person cheats, he steals and lies. And that's what he would do. He lied. He would lie to people and cheat, and especially when his mother told him to. Anyway, and so
I'm sorry.
it's true. Anyway, and so they did that. But the problem is that and so is that really the kind of people who God wanted? And so the thing is that it was clear that so Abraham was required to only choose one son. One son is going to be the blessing to all the world, and so that was Isaac. And then Isaac had said, well, then I need to choose one son who's going to be the blessing for all the world. And so Isaac chose Esau because he says Esau's a strong guy and he's going to be able to change the whole world. Except that it didn't work out that way because Isaac wasn't really the one in charge. It was his wife who was really in charge, and she chose Jacob. And so Jacob, they tricked Isaac, and Jacob ended up getting the blessing to bless the whole world. And then Esau got really angry and said, Jacob, I'm going to kill you, and drives him out of town. Okay, then Jacob goes and has 12 sons. That's not all the kids he had. He had lots more kids, but he had 12 sons. And Jacob, at this point, now he had a favorite. He definitely had his favorite son. His favorite son was called Joseph, and Joseph, he treated him really special, which all the brothers hated, and so they sold him into slavery and he ended up going to Egypt. And when he was in Egypt as a slave, he ended up saving the whole country, and in fact saving all the countryside, including his father's family.
Wow.
Won't get into the details of that. If you want to find out that, just need to read Genesis. And then Jacob at that point said, okay, now I need to choose someone who would be the blessing for the entire world. Because Abraham chose one, Isaac chose one, and now Jacob says, now I need to choose one. And what he did was he chose all of his sons. He chose them all because he said, I'm not going to have that kind of murderous envy between my children. I'm not going to do that. So he chose all of his sons. And those 12 sons ended up becoming the 12 tribes of Israel. Israel is the other name for Jacob. Jacob had two names. He had one name Jacob, which was cheater, and then one name Israel, which is wrestler with God. A guy who struggles with God. And so the whole country, the whole nation was named Israel, and his 12 sons ended up becoming the heads of the patriarchs of the 12 tribes. Okay, and then they all moved down to Egypt where Joseph was, because there was famine everywhere else, and Joseph was saving everyone, so he followed down. And they ended up in Egypt for 400 years. And from that time, they went from 12 people into a massive horde of huge people. So much so that the other Egyptians started getting nervous. You got these foreigners. They're still foreigners. They've been living in our land for like 400 years, and they're still foreigners. They still are separated, and they still are living with sheep, and we hate sheep. It's true. Egyptians hate sheep. But I don't know that they hate them now. They probably don't now. But back in the day, they hated sheep. Okay, and so they hate sheep, and yet all these people are there. And so Pharaoh, who is the god of Egypt, he's the human god of Egypt, human god ruler of Egypt. He said, "Okay, we're gonna take all of these Hebrews and all of these foreigners. We're gonna take all the foreigners and we're gonna make them slaves. So that way, all the time they have to work for us, and they can work on their own gardens too in their own time. But most of the time, they're going to work for us." So he made them all slaves. And then after 100 years of slavery, there's this guy. Who was born named Moses. We all have heard about Moses. And most of the rest of the time that I'm going to talk about Moses. Okay, so Moses was born to a Hebrew woman, ended up getting adopted by someone by Pharaoh's daughter, and ended up getting raised in Pharaoh's house. So
Moses is the one that was shown down in the desert.
Yeah. By the way, it's interesting that when he was put in a basket of reeds in the Bible, it doesn't say that he was in a basket. It says that he was in an ark. He was pushed in the water in an ark, just like Noah. Anyway, so Moses is in Pharaoh's house, and then he finds out that he's a Hebrew, and he kills somebody, and Pharaoh says, "Oh, well, I don't like you," and Moses says, "Goodbye," and he runs away. And then he goes into the wilderness. When he goes in the wilderness, he's 40 years old, and he stays in the wilderness, and he gets married, and he stays there for 40 years. So now he's 80 years old, and God has the burning bush, and calls Moses and says, "Moses, you're going to save my people. You're going to deliver them." And Moses says, "I'm picking 80 years old. And you want me to go down and deliver all the people out of Egypt at 80 years old? I don't think so." God says, "Oh yeah, you're doing this." And Moses, no, I can't do this. I can't talk very well. I stutter. We can't do this. God says, "Oh yeah, you're doing it." Anyway, so they have an argument, and of course Moses does it because it doesn't. When you're having an argument with God, God wins.
Yep.
God doesn't have a problem with people having argument, just as long as we recognize he wins. Jonah and God had an argument once. God won, although Jonah was a good fighter. Okay, so he comes back in. He goes. So Moses goes back to Egypt against his own will, and then you remember what happens. So Pharaoh says, "We don't want them to go. These are our slaves. We need the good workers." And Moses says, "Oh yeah, God's going to make them go." And Pharaoh goes, "I'm a god. Look, I'm a god. You can't make me do things that I don't want to do." And Moses says, "Okay, let's see." 10 plagues later, Pharaoh is just like, "Get out of here. We don't even want to see you anymore." Partly because someone out of his own household, a child out of his own household, ended up getting killed in one of the plagues. A lot of Egyptians ended up getting killed because of the plagues. But this is the time that it happened. It actually touched Pharaoh's family themselves. So he's like, "Get out of here. I don't want to see you ever again. Don't ever come back to me." So Moses says, "Good, we got what we want." And so Moses just packs up everybody and they go. And then God plays a trick on the children of Israel and all the Hebrews. Now, I just want to say one thing. It's at this point that they are called Hebrews. Before then, they were called children of Israel. Okay? But after the time that they spent in Egypt, then they're called Hebrews or children of Israel, one way or the other. there are two possible things that the word Hebrew could have come from. But I think that the one that's most likely, the one that I like, is that that it comes from an Egyptian word which means immigrant or foreign. That they called everyone who was a foreigner, he called them Hebrews. And when the children of Israel left Egypt, they had with them a lot of other people who were slaves, and they had other Egyptians as well who were leaving the country. So it wasn't just people in Abraham's family. It was mostly them, but it wasn't only them. And so, but they were all the ones that were there were people who were either slaves or they were outcasts or they were rejects for some reason, and they all wanted to get out of Egypt. So they're all leaving. And then God played a trick on them, and he says, okay, follow me. And he has the whole pillar of cloud or pillar of fire, depending on if it's daytime, it looks like a cloud. If it's nighttime, it looks like a fire because it's a big, shiny pillar. Anyway, and so they're all following that, and God says, okay, come on over. We're going to go into this little enclave here, right up next to the Red Sea. And then right then, Pharaoh and his army is coming up and getting them on the other side. So they're pinched in between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's army. And so the children of Israel are like, well, are we going to choose the sea or are we going to choose the army? And they're like, help, because you can't swim across the sea. And besides, the sea wants to kill them. And you can't go face Pharaoh's army because they'll certainly die over there. And so what are we going to do? And God just says, just watch. And then of course he splits the Red Sea and they walk across on dry land, because in the creation story we learned that God has control over the sea. Remember, the oceans covered the whole world, and God says, nope, back up.
Yeah.
This is just another version of that creation, where God says, back off, see, let my people through. And they walked across on dry land because God blocked up the sea, just like he did in creation. It's the same thing, nothing new here. Anyways, they cross the sea, come on the other side, and then, of course, Pharaoh's army follows them and crash. The sea goes down on top of them. And the conclusion of the story is, according to the Bible, they never saw Pharaoh or his army or Egypt again. They never went back. Wow, great conclusion. Whew, what a story. That's an amazing story. Of course, you can see it in the Ten Commandments, plus some extra stuff that they made up to go into the movie. But still, pretty good movie. Charlton Heston as Moses, that works out pretty well. Another really good version, though, is the animated version, Prince of Egypt, which is kind of the mini Ten Commandments. It's like the Ten Commandments, which is shorter and even looks more amazing. We saw it at a really huge screen when it came out. It was really nice. Anyway,
Prince of Egypt is a good movie.
It's a good movie.
I mean, there's that made up stuff.
There's still the made up stuff.
But
yeah. Like the whole thing that Moses was raised as Pharaoh's brother. Freedom. No. But it doesn't matter. That's fine. It's a fine story. But it's not in the Bible. Okay. So finally now we get God's plan going back in motion again. God says, okay, I'm going to take these people and I'm going to make them a new nation, and I'm going to train them how to have peace and justice among themselves and to listen to me. Okay, so very first thing that God does is he gets them in a place where there's no food. This is the way God works. God's saying, like, oh, here, there's no water. Oh, here, there's no food. But God gives them food. Now, the problem is that what God wanted is he wanted them to come to him and say, God, we don't have any food. Could you please give us some food? That's what he wants them to do. But instead what they do is, God hates us. We're going back to Egypt. And then Moses is just like, no, you can't go back to Egypt. There's this thing, it's called the sea. It's between us
and it's not going to open up this time.
Yeah, it's not coming up. Anyway, so you can't go back. He says, let's talk to God about it. And God says, hey, glad you asked. And so let's give you some food. He says, this is the trick. I'm only giving you food 6 days a week. And on the 7th day, you're going to do this thing, and it's called rest. You are not going to work on this day. And everyone says, what the heck is that? We've been working 7 days a week, 30 days a month, 365 days a year. 360 days, by the way. Do you know that in the Hebrew Bible, there's only 360 days?
Oh, really?
Yeah, 360 days in the Hebrew Bible. They add an extra month every few years just to catch it all up.
Gotcha.
Anyway, so yeah, 360 days a year. So we work every day. And God says, nope, not anymore. Now you get a day of rest. And everyone says, this is weird. This is weird. I know about this. I mean, you ever get to a place where you work so hard, we've been working hard for years, and all of a sudden you're resting and you just go, oh my goodness, there's something wrong with my life. I'm not doing enough. I need to do more. That's what's going on with these guys. They're like, we need to do something. We need to do. But God says, nope. Guess what? There's no food this day. There's nothing for you to do. And they go, oh, I feel really weird. God is training them to learn a new pattern, to learn a pattern of rest. That they have a certain amount of work, and then they learn a pattern of rest. He's trying to teach them how to be balanced, how to actually take care of themselves. Isn't that awesome? God is so awesome. Anyway, so he's trying to train them in that. And then they get to a place and there's no water. And then there's a place where it's poison water. And they say, oh, this is horrible. God hates us. We're going back. And Moses says, you can't go back. And he says, how about we ask God? And God says, oh yeah, we'll take care of it. We got plenty of water here. And he takes care of it. And then they go to Mount Sinai. And Mount Sinai, they get they go up. And Moses says, okay, you guys got to all be ready. This is a big event. And so they all go up to the mountain and they all hear the voice of God. And the voice of God sounds like a thunderstorm. So kind of hear a voice, but it's in a thunderstorm. And like it's the thunder talking to you. And what the thunder spoke to all the people was the 10 Commandments. That's what they heard. They heard the 10 Commandments. It was all dark and it was thundering, and they all heard the 10 Commandments through the thunder. And then a group of them went together and approached Moses and says, we don't want this anymore. Please, could you please not have God talk to us anymore? We would rather you talk to us. You go talk to God and you tell us what God said. And God said, fine, that's good. And Moses said, that's fine. That'll work. So, and so Moses says, okay, but before I go and talk to God and tell you what else God has to say, first we've got to make a commitment. And so Moses goes and has this huge ceremony. This is after the 10 Commandments. He has this huge ceremony in which there's this enormous sacrifice with tons of blood. And Moses takes huge branches, dips them in ox blood, sprinkles them over the people, and then sprinkles them over an altar and says to all the people, this is the blood of the covenant that God has made with you. And from that point on, the people agreed to do what God says. Just remember, God wanted people that would just listen to him and follow his guidance. And then they would be God's people. And God would be the king. God's the king, they're the people. And that's the commitment. So what they were doing is God was establishing the kingdom of God in which God is in charge. And so he set that up. And then Moses said, okay, I'm going to go for a little while and talk to God. And he was gone for 40 days. And the people said, oh my goodness, Moses is dead. This is what they said. Oh my goodness, Moses is dead. What are we going to do? He's been gone for all this time. He must be dead now. And so what are we going to do? We don't have God to lead us. because we told Moses that we wanted to hear from him instead of God, so God's not going to lead us anymore, and all we've got is Moses' brother. So we went to Moses' brother, said, what do we do? Moses' brother said, here, I'll build you a statue. So he built them a golden calf. And then they all worshiped the golden calf, and they were very happy. And then they had an orgy to celebrate the golden calf. And Aaron goes and says, this is your God that led you out of Egypt. And everyone had an orgy, and it was great. And they really enjoyed themselves. Unfortunately, Moses came back right then. Moses was not amused. There were all kinds of commandments being broken right there all at once. It's been a little bit more than a month, and they've broken like half the 10 commandments already.
Yeah.
Probably the other half too.
Yeah, they were thinking about it anyway. And so there they are, just breaking all of them. And Moses is just like, oh, really? And so he had a tantrum and broke the 10 commandments. He did. He broke the 10 commandments. He broke them into little teeny pieces. And then he said, oh man, I'm still mad. And he crushed it into dust. Literally, he crushed it. No, he said I was mad. And so he took the golden calf and he threw it in a fire. And then he put the golden calf in a fire, burned it all up. And then he burned the ashes all the way down until it's just straight ashes. And then he stirred it up, threw it in a bunch of water, and made everybody drink it. And a bunch of people got sick, and some people died because it was probably really nasty. Anyway, he says, this is what you get. And he was so mad. He was really, really mad. Anyway, and so then God and Moses had a talk. And they realized that maybe these people need something to worship. Maybe they need something to see to worship. And so God and Moses came up with a plan to build a box that is supposed to look like it's the throne of God. And it's what we call the Ark of the Covenant. It's actually what the Bible calls it too. It calls it other things too. It also calls it the mercy seat. Because literally the Ark, you remember the Ark of the Covenant, you know, like you saw in Raiders of the Lost Ark and all that. So you got this box, and it's got poles.
Yeah.
You know, although in the movie the poles are gold, they were never gold. They were always wood. They were supposed to be wood. If you had anything other than wood in there, a particular kind of wood, it was wrong. Anyway, so you got the wood in there, and certain people had to carry it, and other people couldn't carry it. If other people carried it, they would die. Anyway, and so that on the top, you can see the angels on the top of the box. Remember the long wings with angels? Yeah, so there's supposed to be like 4 angels, and the wings are pointing toward each other on the box. And if you remember about what they call the 4 living creatures, which in other places is called the 4 cherubim, or the 4 cherubim that say, holy, 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 day and night. That's what that box represents. And God sits on, not the box, the angels. He sits on the angels. The angels are actually the throne of God. Anyway, that's the image that they had. So basically what you were supposed to, so what they're worshiping is they're supposed to be worshiping God who is above the box. You're not supposed to worship the box. You worship God who you can't see above the box. That's how it was supposed to work. So Moses built them the ark so that way they would have something that they could see to worship, or at least the general direction. Okay, so that was fine. Then Moses went back up to God, and he had more laws, and more laws, and more laws. And pretty soon the people are just like, really, Moses, did God really tell you all these laws? And Moses says, yep, they all came from God. And then Moses said, okay, I've given you enough laws. Time to go into your new land. We have a new kingdom. We're released from slavery. We're in a new kingdom. Now we're going to go into a new land. Oh, awesome, everybody says. Let's do it. So Moses says, let's pick 12 people, 2 people from each tribe, or 24 people, because there's 12 tribes,
Right.
right? So 2 people from each tribe, they sent out 24 people, said, you go and look at the land and report back to us what you see. So the spies came back, all these people who went over there, they came back and they said, oh my goodness, there's so much food. It is what an amazing place. There's tons of food, huge amounts of food, and just like really a wonderful place. But one problem, there's all these giants in there. There's these really huge people, and they're like, we can never take over this land. We're just never going to do it. There's a couple of them that said, oh yeah, we can do it. But most of them were saying, no way. So they're sending reports back to their own tribes, and almost everybody is going, oh my goodness, God, you're trying to kill us. You're sending us into a land where there's giants there. How are we possibly going to survive? And God says, no, it's okay. It can happen. And they said, nope, we changed our minds. We're going to go back to Egypt.
Again.
And God says, second, what happened to the whole thing of you doing what I said? Forget it, God. We're done. We're heading back. And God says, you know what? You can't go back. Don't you realize you can't go back? What do you think is going to happen when you go back? Huh? You're going to die. You guys are idiots. But I'll tell you what. I'm not having you go forward either. You're just going to wander around in this empty space, and I'll feed you, but you're going to be here for 40 years. You know why 40 years? 40 years, so that way all you people who've been complaining at me die. And your kids are going to enter the land. That's why I'm having you here for 40 years. And they said, oh, God, we're so sorry. Here, we changed our minds. We'll go back into the land. So I got a bunch of people, little ragtag little army, went into the land, and they all died. Because they couldn't take the land without God's help.
Right.
You know? It's just like, oh, God, we'll do what we say. And God's like, it's too late. And they went anyway. Moses tried to stop them. No, don't go. They went anyway, and they all died.
Wow.
Okay. So Moses wandered with the people for 40 years. Now I want you to think about this. Moses, Pharaoh's house, 40 years. Pharaoh tries to kill him, runs away. Wilderness, 40 years. 80 years old, God says, you deliver the people. So he worked at delivering the people for a year, hung out with them in the wilderness for half a year, something like that. And then God says, okay, all you folks, you're staying in the wilderness for 40 years. Guess what? Moses was alive all that time.
Wow.
So he's 121 years old. At least, yeah. 121 years old. And he's been with these complaining, rebellious, stupid people for 40 years. That would make a person cranky.
Mm-hmm.
That'd really make a person cranky. And so, and then at the end of all this, because Moses wasn't doing too good on the obeying God thing either, that God said, you're not going into the promised land. You're just not going to do it. You're going to die before we get there. You're going to go up on Mount Horeb, and you're going to die there. And you're going to see the land, but you're never going in it. And so Moses just got really ticked out and decided to take it all out on the people in a couple really long speeches. And these really long speeches is where Moses goes over all the important laws, and he goes over all the stupid things the people ever did, and talks about how they really messed up his entire life. We call that the book of Deuteronomy. That's the whole book, is Moses talking to the people and telling them how stupid they are and how stupid they're going to be. That's the book of Deuteronomy. And the funny thing is that the book called Deuteronomy, it actually means Deutero means second, Nami means law. It's the second law. In other words, the second time that we're going over the stuff that we've already talked about. That's what it is. So Moses going over the stuff that he's already talked about. And so you can see how Moses changes things. He changes the story. He changes a little bit the Ten Commandments. He changes little bits here and there, which means that when Moses had to rewrite the Ten Commandments, it was changed the second time around. Now, once again, not in a big way. You still have the top 10, but a lot of the reasons and all that, they're all different. So the details are different. And this is what happens. And so I want you to think about this. Every time that Moses went and received something from God and was telling the people, he kind of changed things around a little bit. It wasn't exactly word for word because he's explaining to the people what God meant, but he wasn't always giving word for word what God said. We need to remember that the only time that God actually spoke to the people directly was in the Ten Commandments, the original Ten Commandments, which Moses broke. So it's a little tricky. It's a little tricky here. Okay, so, but what we do know is that God wanted to teach the people how to love. We know that God wanted to teach the people how to get along with each other. And we also know that Moses wanted to do the same thing. Moses had the same desire that God had. But Moses had a couple problems.
A temper.
He had a temper, very much so. And also, he didn't think that he was worthwhile. He didn't think that he was worth doing all this. That somebody else should be doing it. Like his brother Aaron, who screwed everything up. Anyway, so then Moses went to the top of Mount Horeb, and he died, and then the people went into the land, but we'll talk more about that next week. Now, I want to conclude this by saying something that we probably hadn't brought up before. Now, I want to look at Luke chapter 9. Okay, I want to actually tie this in to Jesus, because it all has to be about Jesus. So I want to look at Luke chapter 9, starting at verse 28. Okay, so I'd like somebody, just a short passage, somebody to read verses 28 through 31. Verses 28 through 31.
Does someone want to read that, or do you want me to?
You go ahead, Diane.
28 through 31. Some 8 days after these sayings, he took along Peter and John and James and went up on the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face became different, and his clothing became white and gleaming. And behold, 2 men were talking with him, and they were Moses and Elijah, who, appearing in glory, were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem.
Okay. So this is what is generally called the Transfiguration. It's never said that in the Bible, but it's called Transfiguration because, of course, Jesus all of a sudden became very shiny. Okay, so Jesus became shiny. But he's also talking to 2 important people, right?
Right.
He's talking to Moses and he's talking to Elijah. We'll talk about Elijah later on, but he's definitely talking to Moses, right? We just found out Moses' whole story, and Moses may have had a temper and all that, but he was an amazing guy, and he had an amazing life, and followed God all of his life. So here we got Moses, and it says there in the translation, in most translations, that Moses and him were talking about his departure, which was about to take place in Jerusalem. But the word departure, I feel, is a really bad translation, because the word literally in Greek is Exodus.
Is what?
Exodus. Like the book of Exodus.
Wow, okay.
Exodus in Greek means the going out. Ex, out of, and the odus is like to walk out or to go out.
Right.
Okay, so to go out, that's where the word departure. So they're translating the Greek word departure, but we're missing something there. Because those of us who are reading in English, I want to say, most of your translations will have a little note by the word departure. I don't know if your particular ones do, but it should have a little note by the word departure, and you look down and it says, this is the word Exodus. Okay. Yours doesn't have that?
No.
Oh, they cheated you. But the NIV does. NIV has that note.
Well, they have to have notes.
Anyway, so it's actually the word Exodus. So it says that Moses was talking to Jesus about Jesus' Exodus that he was about to perform in Jerusalem. Well, wait a minute. Jesus didn't do the Exodus. Moses did the Exodus. What is it? The whole point is that Jesus redid the Exodus. Well, let's think about the whole story again. So we just heard the story of the Exodus, right? The departure from Egypt into the Promised Land. So Jesus. So first of all, it means that Jesus saw the current governments over Galilee, over Judea, over all the areas of Israel are actually oppressive governments that were enslaving people. That these governments were acting just like Pharaoh. And there were huge numbers of slaves, people who were oppressed, people, and not just the Romans. A lot of people say, well, see, the Romans, they were enslaving people. Sure, they were enslaving a lot of people, but it's not just the Romans. It's also talking about the high priest was enslaving people. The Pharisees were enslaving people. Herod was enslaving people. And sometimes it's literally, sometimes they were in slavery to debt. When people went into jail back then, it was usually because of debt. They had debt. People are still enslaved to debt today. And so they're trying to, and some people are in slavery to a false law, a law that God never gave them. Some people it was literal slavery, because sometimes people were literally enslaved, or they were executed. And Jesus came to deliver all the people who wanted to out of that. So he was performing an exodus. He was getting people out of these horrible nations, out of these nations that were enslaving people. And so he was welcoming his new people into a new nation. He was doing it first by having them cross water, which is a baptism. Baptism means crossing water. It means going through water. And then his nation was established by his blood of the covenant, just like Moses had. Remember in the Last Supper, Jesus said, "This is my blood of the new covenant." Jesus was actually quoting Moses, who said way back when, "This is the blood of the covenant," when he sprinkled all the people. So Jesus was saying, I'm making a new nation with God, just like Moses did. I am bringing you across water, just like Moses did. And then he gave them a new law, because Jesus went up to the mount, and he just like on the mount, just like Mount Sinai, where they received the 10 Commandments, and Jesus taught them a new law, which is called the Sermon on the Mount, which is basically love. That's right. He taught them how to love, a new obedience to God, which is to enact love and mercy. So he was just like Moses in giving them a new law. Because Jesus himself had gone to God and said, "This is the law that I want you to give to the people." And he gave them a different law, a different way of looking at Moses' law, and also some new laws that they hadn't heard before. And then he went to all the people and he said, "You who are poor, who are rejected, who are outcast, all of you can come with me, and I'll take you out." And that is the Exodus. Jesus actually did the same thing that Moses did. But it's actually kind of hard for us to look at it sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to, but the Bible reminds us that Jesus was doing the same thing. And so all that he was doing was, and then afterwards, he, in his discipleship with people, he's training people to depend on God and to live out the new law, which is mercy. So Jesus did exactly what Moses did, and sometimes his people complained, and sometimes his people didn't obey everything, but in the end, it turned out pretty well.
He even had the cranky bit down sometimes.
He even had the cranky bit. He was definitely cranky sometimes. Not as cranky as Moses.
No.
So what we need to, so once again, when we're reading the Bible, we're reading all this, we need to remember, Jesus is redoing all this. Jesus is renewing all this stuff that we read about Moses. Jesus is doing it too, except he's doing it better. He's actually, and so this is why Jesus said that he was fulfilling what was being done in the past. He's taking the whole story, everything, and he is redoing it. Except that he's doing it in a way so that way it's actually successful. And so he isn't just fulfilling prophecy, he is reliving all of Scripture. We get to, and we see that again, because it's amazing how that happens. Okay? Any questions?